Please be seated. Good afternoon. Joining me are Dr. Karen Salmon, the State Superintendent of Schools, Ed Clark, the Executive Director of the Maryland Center for School Safety, and Glenn Fuston, who is the Executive Director of the Governor's Office of Crime Control and Prevention. There's no more important job than keeping our citizens safe, especially our children. In the wake of the horrific school shooting in Parkland, Florida, citizens here in our state and all across America want to know and deserve to know what government at all levels is doing to increase accountability and to implement common sense reforms to help keep our children safe, and what we are collectively doing to stop gun violence and violent crime. Classrooms should never be a place of fear for our children, and no mom or dad should ever have to worry when they send their kids off to school in the morning whether their son or daughter is going to come home safely. Immediately after the horrific shooting in Florida, I reached out to Governor Rick Scott and to local officials in Broward County to offer our full support. What happened there was an unspeakable tragedy, and the conversations that we're now having in households and communities all across this country are important ones. I just spent several days in Washington with the nation's governors, and we had meetings with the White House, with cabinet members, with leaders in Congress, and many of our discussions were centered around these issues. Government at all levels is grappling with what more can be done to keep our kids safe. In Maryland, we have already enacted many of the measures that other states are just now beginning to think about and talk about. The Governor's Office of Crime Control and Prevention is implementing and working to expand the Handle with Care model across our state, which connects law enforcement, schools, and human services in order to provide appropriate interventions for children who are exposed to trauma in their home, school, or community. Our Maryland Center for School Safety is the only center of its kind in the country to be housed in the state's Law Enforcement Fusion Center that ensures that critical school safety information is shared in near real time among school safety and security directors, school administrators, law enforcement, Homeland Security staff, and the Maryland Coordination and Analysis Center. Every week, the Maryland Center for School Safety hosts a security call with school administrators from every single jurisdiction, along with local law enforcement officials. The center also shares information with local schools on best practices, programs, and resources, and provides technical assistance and training. Nearly 24 more training events are scheduled just this year, which are either sponsored by or will be attended by the staff of the Maryland Center for School Safety. Great work is already being done to ensure the safety of Maryland students and our teachers and our schools. In many ways, our state is ahead of the curve. And in just the past few weeks, we have seen where this increased coordination has paid off. The most recent example involved a troubled student in Montgomery County who acknowledged that he regularly carried a concealed loaded firearm to school. Thankfully, he is now being held without bond. There also were recent incidents involving students in Frederick County and St. Mary's County. Now, fortunately, in those cases, the involvement of students and parents and law enforcement enabled local authorities to prevent a potential tragedy from occurring. Incidents like this here in Maryland and all across the country make it very clear that we must remain vigilant when it comes to protecting our kids. Although I believe we're ahead of the nation, we must do more. So today I am announcing that we will add an additional $125 million to accelerate and enhance school safety improvements throughout the state, including secure doors and windows, metal detectors, security cameras, panic buttons, and other capital improvements. In addition, we will commit an additional $50 million per year in new school safety grants to supplement and improve our state and local school safety efforts. This will include new school resource officers, additional counselors, and cutting-edge technology. This funding will be allocated through the educational lockbox proposal that we announced 2 weeks ago, which is going to provide $4.4 billion in increased funding on education. Parents have a right to know how their tax dollars are being spent, and they also deserve to know that we are prioritizing the safety of their children. We're also submitting emergency legislation that will create, for the first time in Maryland history, aggressive statewide standards for school safety, and which will also broaden the authority of the Maryland Center for School Safety. We will require every school system in Maryland to conduct a mandatory annual school-by-school safety assessment to include a specific plan to address behavioral threats as well as a plan of action in the event of an emergency. Once developed, these plans would be subject to the approval of the Maryland State Board of Education with recommendations and oversight from the Maryland Center for School Safety. Our bill would create and require training and certification for all school resource officers. It will require mandatory training for the designated security administrator and security staff in our schools. And we will amend the Maryland Center for School Safety Governing Board to include more law enforcement and community representatives. On Friday, I will submit a supplemental budget to immediately increase the annual budget of the Maryland Center for School Safety by 600%. This increased funding will be used to hire analysts to immediately expand the center's physical presence across the state and to hire social media trackers to better funnel intelligence to state and local law enforcement. We will also provide additional funding for local school districts to assist them in conducting these school-by-school safety assessments and to participate in collaborative planning with local law enforcement and mental health experts. In addition to ensuring the safety of our kids in Maryland schools, we're taking action to prevent, prepare for, and respond to threats to other government facilities across our state. I just signed an executive order directing every Maryland state agency to immediately develop, review, and/or update internal plans, policies, and procedures related to active assailant events. All state agencies will be required to participate in a coordinated active assailant initiative, and each agency will be expected to develop and share and collaborate on active assailant planning and training exercises with public and non-governmental partners. I've said for years that we need to do more to keep guns out of the hands of the mentally ill and people with criminal backgrounds. That's why we will push for and support what is known as red flag legislation. In general, this policy would allow family members or law enforcement to petition a court for a lethal violence protective order issued by a judge, which would prohibit an individual from having any firearms or ammunition if the judge has clear evidence that the family member poses an immediate and present danger of causing injury to themselves or to others. Individuals with mental illness should not have access to firearms, period. This year, let's get it done. For years, I've been a strong proponent of universal instant background checks. We need more sharing of information across the country. It's long past time for the federal government finally take action on this common sense measure. They need to get it done. We need to strengthen and clarify pre-existing laws that deal with firearms held by someone who has been convicted of domestic violence. This well-known dangerous combination can have disastrous effects. And we saw most recently with the murder of a police officer in Prince George's County. Immediately after the tragedy in Las Vegas, the next day, I made it clear that I wanted something to be done about bump stocks. We need to get it done, either at the state or the federal level. Our administration will push for all of these bipartisan common sense reforms. Before I took office, Maryland had already adopted some of the toughest gun laws in America. But that didn't stop 343 people from being gunned down and killed in Baltimore City last year, because criminals don't usually follow gun laws or murder laws or drug laws. We just last week announced that we rounded up 500 people in Baltimore City and arrested them and removed 249 of the most violent repeat offenders from the streets. We have legislation that must be passed to stop these repeat violent offenders. If you commit a crime with a gun, we need to get you off the streets and put you in jail. If you're a repeat violent offender, we need to put you in jail. This revolving door of people shooting people and then being let back on the street has been going on for too long. You won't be able to just continue to do it again and again. We're pleased that so much of our crime legislation is making great progress in the Senate. I want to thank Baltimore County Senator Bobby Zirkin, who's the chairman of the Judicial Proceedings Committee, who's been working with our administration and with a bipartisan group of senators who've been working together on these important measures. I just want to be clear again that I think our most important responsibility is keeping the citizens of Maryland safe. Most important responsibility we could possibly have is keeping our children safe, and my intent is to work together to make sure we get that done. And with that, I'd be happy to take some of your questions.
Governor, tying specifically this $125 million